perfect tarantula keeper does not exist. I'm not perfect. I've messed up, I've made mistakes, and I've had things happen publicly, by the way. And at times it's brought criticism. I've had a lot of perfect keepers come at me, and don't be fooled. I feel like a lot of those perfect keepers are some of the most imperfect, low-key. So what can go wrong keeping tarantulas? Quite a lot. And so I made a list, because if you're keeping tarantulas, especially in a larger volume like I do and like a lot of other keepers do, you're going to run into issues. The bad stuff is part of the hobby as well. I've been keeping almost a decade now, so I feel like I have enough experience to kind of sit down and warn you on issues that may arise. The first and the biggest issue, the one I worry about the most, is falls and injuries. Fortunately, I have yet to experience a tarantula falling, whether it be from handling, or sometimes they can even fall in their enclosure if the height to the substrate is like pretty dramatic. But falls are like one of the biggest risks, and why a lot of people choose not to handle their tarantulas at all, or be very selective about which ones they do or how they handle them. So tarantula abdomens have a lot of important stuff inside of them, and unfortunately, although they do have an exoskeleton, their abdomen is like the squishiest thing about them. It's the most fragile thing about them. Treat their abdomen like a water balloon. If it ruptures, if it's punctured, that's pretty much it. There's usually no hope beyond that, but there are other kind of injuries that can happen. Sometimes tarantulas will drop a leg or a pedipalp, but they will grow it back in the next molt. If they break or injure one of their fangs, they can usually still survive as long as they have like one functioning fang, or they're able to eat still, and their fangs will also repair on a molt. So a lot of times tarantulas are able to repair injuries like that themselves without any intervention. Unfortunately, sometimes they do need help. So in the event that they do get an injury on one of their legs, sometimes you can actually prevent them from completely dropping the leg by stopping the bleeding. Tarantula blood is very different than ours. It's called hemolymph, and it's a clear fluid that will come out, and they don't really have blood platelets to naturally stop that bleeding. One of the first issues that I experienced keeping tarantulas when I was new was that I shut the lid on Salem, my Grammostola pulchris pedipalp, and it was leaking hemolymph, and I was super alarmed. It was actually my first tarantula video ever where I sat down and discussed it. I was able to actually save his pedipalp. He molted. Obviously, he's since years and years and years later been totally fine, but what I did to stop the hemolymph was essentially I used cornstarch. Cornstarch is really great at patching up inverts that are leaking, that are bleeding, and it clumps and it can totally save them. Some people also recommend super glue. I've never done that. I feel like too much can go wrong, but sprinkling a little bit of cornstarch on an injury tends to be life-saving. Another kind of injury that I've dealt with spiders is molting issues, getting their molt stuck. I've made several videos about different spiders, tarantulas that this has happened to. Unfortunately, molting is probably one of the most likely ways your tarantula could get injured, by having molt stuck. Sometimes if they don't completely emerge out of their molt, it kind of drags behind them, and I've had to trim that excess off as much as I can, because if you let them keep walking around dragging it, and say they have like the molt stuck to their abdomen, then eventually that can rip their abdomen. So there's lots of things that you really have to look out for when it comes to their molting. Another way that I've heard of spiders getting injured is getting stuck on the screen lids in like exoteras or just like aquarium lids. I don't think the finer screen is as worrisome as like the bigger screens. I mean, it's definitely still a risk. I've never like had a spider get stuck, but I've seen it. These kind of screens are like the worst for tarantula paws, because they have like tiny little retractable nails, and they tend to get stuck on these, and especially terrestrials, which it's even worse if it's a terrestrial, because they are very clunky and they're not built for falls or jumps and stuff like that. So it's way more of a risk. But I've heard of spiders falling or losing a leg and just being stuck like that for like hours. The way that I would recommend, if you ever have a spider get stuck on one of these, is to very carefully take the lid off and flip it over, and then they should be good and you can coax them off of it. Also, just be careful about like decor you put in there. Obviously, like anything can cause some kind of injury somehow if it happens just the right way. Like freak accidents happen, but you can also try to eliminate things from happening. Just any kind of rocks that you put in the enclosure, any kind of sticks, just kind of check for like pokey areas. Like, yes, obviously in the wild, they face stuff like this all the time, but in the wild, they also don't live as long typically as they do in captivity, because we kind of eliminate a lot of risks keeping them safely in a terrarium. But those are just some ways that your tarantulas could get injured, and it's not good. So the next issue that I see a lot, and I've also experienced this, especially after molts, is dehydration. Tarantulas Tarantulas can certainly get dehydrated, and sometimes it can happen really fast, especially if they recently molted, and sometimes they're just too weak to come out of their burrow and make it to the water dish, because when they molt, they have a lot of internal hydration that they depend on to get through the molt, and then sometimes afterwards they're just like already dehydrated. Also, if you're relying on misting over water dishes, which a lot of keepers do, and that's okay as long as you stay on top of it, but if you're not staying on top of the misting and they don't have a water dish, that water dish is kind of like a safety net. But if you're not using water dishes, it's definitely a risk that they could face dehydration much quicker. One way that you can tell if your tarantula is dehydrated is if they start to go into death curl. My first piece of advice when I hear somebody telling me that their spider's going into death curl is put their mouth part in some water. If you catch your spider in death curl, barely responsive, put their mouth in water, sometimes they can bounce back like 100%. What I recommend is just getting like a bottle cap of water, fill it with water, dampen their substrate, and just place their mouth over the water if they're sluggish or in death curl. Dehydration can cause a lot of symptoms that look like other things like DKS, which we can talk about later. Also, if it's a species that's been in pre-molt for like a really long time and they're not eating, they're probably not getting the amount of hydration they typically would get if they were eating their prey, because obviously they get a lot of their hydration from eating. If they're not eating, that's why it's kind of recommended to stay on top of watering mature males and stuff like that, because they'll wander a bunch, they eat a lot less, and they get dehydrated much faster. All right, this one's more for you as the keeper, but bites and urticating hairs. I've personally never been bitten by any of my tarantulas, but it is a risk. Now, tarantula venom is not typically deadly, but it can definitely cause problems. It can certainly hurt a lot. In response to the bite, you could easily fling them and they could get injured that way. I'm more so concerned about urticating hairs because I have had a few run-ins with urticating hairs. Nothing too severe, but it is the Theraphosa species that get me every time. A couple days ago, I was filming a reel and I decided that as I opened the reel, I was going to hold my T Blondie molt, which she has molted like months ago, okay? So this molt was just sitting on my desk. And I normally wear gloves when I deal with Theraphosa because I'm just really sensitive to the hairs. I have like gotten like hives and stuff from them before, but I didn't wear gloves. And I literally just held it like this for just a few seconds and my hands were on fire for 2 days. I literally didn't even want to get out of bed because it was so annoying. I didn't want to play my Nintendo. I didn't want to play Pokopia. I didn't want to use my hands at all. My hands are fine now, but it was 2 days of burning and itching so bad and just right in my palms. And that's for, I mean, even just touching it now, I still can feel like a tingle. And that was like 5 or 6 days ago. So yeah, be careful even handling their molts because it sucks. And it would be even worse if you breathed them in or got them in your eye. You can seriously get eye damage, okay? So if you're picking up a molt and it's breezy and it blows in your face, like you're cooked. Like you don't want that. It's not overkill to wear gloves sometimes, okay? So next we're gonna talk about DKS and exposure to toxins. Tarantulas are a little bit more sensitive. Spiders are sensitive. In fact, there's like certain scents and things that you can place around your house to like deter spiders and insects and stuff like that. Obviously, you don't wanna be like burning like lavender incense if lavender repels your spiders. And I know a lot of people are already aware that like those wax melters and air fresheners and things, those are not safe, like even for cats. And if you keep birds, then you already know like birds are insanely sensitive, like even more so than spiders. But you want to be careful about incense, you want to be careful about candles, you want to be careful, very careful about flea prevention on your animals. I give my dogs the flea pills. I'm just handing them a pill and they're eating it. It's not like the gooey like frontline and stuff that you're putting on them. But if you're using the kind of topical flea prevention on your cats or dogs and you pet them and then you start doing some maintenance with your spiders, you're exposing them to some toxins that's like very deadly to them. Also, if you keep reptiles and say you had like a snake that got mites, you want to separate them. You can't just like spray them with like mite prevention or mite treatment when you have arachnids in the room. That's another way that you could possibly expose your tarantulas to toxins. Hairspray, dry shampoo, if they're in your bedroom or near your bathroom, watch out for that. Because one thing that can happen is DKS. It's like dyskinetic something syndrome. Dyskinetic syndrome, yeah. It's a rarely fatal, often untreatable neurological condition characterized by jerky, spastic, I know that's a bad word in the UK. It's not in the US, so don't come for me, but like, just saying. Or uncoordinated movements typically leading to death curl. So I did have this happen one time in the whole decade of me keeping. It happened to my adult female D. diamantinensis. I had her up until, I think it was during the winter time, she developed DKS symptoms where she just had jerky movements. She couldn't eat. Obviously, I'm super careful about exposure to things. So I don't really know what caused it, but one rumored way that they can get it is by exposure. But they can also get it from things like age. And again, this was a spider that I had in my care for almost a decade. So I know she wasn't exposed to anything. I know there wasn't really anything going on. What I think happened is that she was just really old and it just happened spontaneously. I did reach out to a couple of vendors and ask them like if that ever happened to them. All of them said yes, they've had it happen one time or another. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you can prevent DKS from happening, but you can definitely like eliminate more risks of it by just being careful about like what you have around your spiders. Like I even, we have like mosquito fogger trucks that come down the street and like they spray for mosquitoes, which is horrible for the environment, horrible for the lightning bugs, only kills the mosquitoes in the air, doesn't kill their larvae or anything like that. I contacted the city and had them take me off the list so that if they come down our street, they do not spray here at all. Oh, or if you live in an apartment and they like routinely spray. I've heard that people have told apartment complexes that they're allergic to the pesticides, and that typically gets them taken off a list if it's not like voluntary. So just, you know, just a tip. But yeah, you don't want that around your spiders. All right, this is one of the most common issues that you probably have come across at some point already. If you haven't been even keeping long, you've probably dealt with this, but food strikes or picky eaters. I had a friend get her first tarantula. It was an Aphonopelma calcodes. This tarantula did not eat for over a freaking year. And it happens. I've heard of spiders going as long as a year or more without eating. For that to happen to your first tarantula totally sucks, because that's not a great way to start out in the hobby. But as long as they are drinking water, as long as you are keeping that water dish full, keeping them from getting dehydrated, typically they'll eventually molt and be fine and have an appetite again after that. However, I have come across my fair share of picky eaters. I have some spiders that won't touch a roach. I have some spiders that won't touch a hornworm. I have some spiders that will only eat crickets. But then I have some more aggressive eaters that will eat anything I give them, even like a frozen thawed mouse. So if your spider's not eating, try a different kind of prey. Experiment a little bit, but they might just be in pre-molt. You might just have to wait it out. It sucks, but very rarely is it fatal. They'll eat if they need to eat, typically. All right, so this one is more in relation to true spiders, but it can also be for tarantulas too if you do end up getting like a wild caught spider or you don't know it's a wild caught spider or tarantula. Surprise babies. Mainly this happens with jumping spiders, where somebody will buy a adult female Phidippus regius or even an adult female black widow and they're not aware that it's wild caught. Most vendors do disclose it. It's so frustrating to me when vendors don't disclose it, especially to somebody getting their first spider, because then they don't know that spider might be pregnant, or as we call it, gravid. And if you get a gravid spider and she lays an egg sac, that can absolutely send some people into a spiral. It sucks. I would panic too. I would totally panic if I was new and I got a spider and they were gravid. There's ways to avoid this. Make sure that what you're getting is captive bred. But in situations where I do get like surprise babies, it's never happened with tarantulas, unfortunately. I normally welcome surprise babies. And if you have like a jumping spider that drops an egg sac or a black widow, you can get like a big butterfly pop-up net from like the internet and just put the entire enclosure in it. They make huge ones too, but I use those. It works great. And then later on you can go in and collect the babies. I usually get like a paintbrush and just collect them. Behind like the jumping spider, usually they have a little line of web. You don't even have to touch the spider, like the jumping spider. Just grab, like take the paintbrush and just go behind them and you'll have them by their web, and then you can just drop them in different cups. Do not get wild caught if you're new and you're unprepared for a possible egg sac. All right, mites and parasites. Oh my God. So this is not a common issue. Okay, no, wait, let me walk that back. Mites are common. Mites are in all of my enclosures. Let me say that again. I have mites in all of my enclosures. I have green mites. I have springtails, which are mites that I've introduced myself, technically mites. Green mites are harmless, but their populations can absolutely explode sometimes. I've had a couple situations, not here, but at our old apartment, I had like that hutch with all my spiders on it. And one time, actually 2 times, I had a cup of super worms, and I remember I left the cup of super worms and a glass of water next to each other one day, and I had little white green mites covering my entire hutch a few days later, like literally covering it. I was wiping them down with like, I think vinegar. Oh my God, they were everywhere. They didn't go anywhere. They're not harmful, but it is alarming to walk in and see just like little white green mites everywhere. They're not parasitic. They're just, that's what they do. They just kind of like explode in populations when the humidity's up, when there's lots of food. The other time that it happened to me, same scenario, cup of super worms, and it was the spray bottle. It seems like super worms and water equals green mites everywhere. Now, normally the green mite population, totally under control. I can't even see them. I don't even know they're there usually until I film like a time lapse, and you can kind of like see something move in the substrate sometimes. But you probably have green mites in your enclosure. Like I think it's pretty natural. Mites are natural, by the way. Like it's just normal. If you're making like a little ecosystem, a little terrarium, it's normal and natural to have mites in them. Soil mites, green mites, whatever. The kind of mites that you want to worry about that are super uncommon and tend to only happen in wild wild caught specimens are like the parasitic ones that attach to the spider's joints and actually like suck hemolymph and stuff. Actually, I do remember I did get a wild caught trapdoor that had mites like that, but it was one of those situations where it's like a symbiotic relationship. Millipedes and hissing cockroaches always have like those mites on them. And those are good. Those are fine. Those are dandy. Those are common. Like pretty much every giant African millipede has those mites on them, crawling on them. Every single hissing roach I ever got has some of those little brown mites that live with them. Those aren't parasitic, but the ones that kind of go into the joints and like stay there and don't move, I did have a trapdoor with that. Now I was told it was a symbiotic thing, but I didn't like it because of how they were on the joints. So what I did was get a Q-tip with, I think it was Vaseline, and I just dabbed them off and it worked. So now as for like other issues that can come up, there are nematodes. Again, this is something that is pretty rare. It does happen, but it's usually in wild caught adults. So as long as you're like being careful about bringing in wild caught adults. A lot of people freak out though and think their spider has nematodes because they have like white crust on their mouth or whiteness, because one of the symptoms of nematodes is like these like worms, this like white goo and these worms that's like in their mouth. It moves, okay? If they have like a whiteness gunk in their mouth and it's moving, that's nematodes. That's bad, okay? But if they just have white gunk in their mouth, 99% of the time they walked in poop. They accidentally wiped some of their poop on their mouth. I've gotten so many pictures of people's tarantulas with poop on their mouth and they're spiraling thinking it's nematodes. It is not. Next issue though is something I have unfortunately dealt with, which is called impaction. Impaction is a little bit more common, and a lot of times you don't even know your spider's impacted until their abdomen is huge and they have like a crusty covered poop butt. I had Mew, my E. campistratus adult female, loved her dearly. She was probably my favorite tarantula in my collection for a while there. She did pass away of impaction, and that was pretty early on in my keeping too. I think I had only been keeping a few years. I remember I made a video that did go kind of viral, and to this day it still gets a lot of views and comments. I think just from people searching up impaction because maybe they're worried their spider has it. There's not like tons of content about it. We don't really know what causes it. Rumors, there's rumors that like certain diets and stuff can cause it. We don't know that. They're rumors. So I'm not going to tell you avoid this or that because we don't know. I'll just tell you symptoms that Mew had. She did not eat good at all for like 6 months. I think she was impacted when I bought her, but it didn't get severe until later on. She was going in and out of death curl. Like I'd catch her in death curl for no reason. I'd try to hydrate her and she would bounce back a little, but not really. And her abdomen was huge and it was just getting bigger. And then eventually I noticed that her abdomen was very crusty. I soaked her abdomen in water. I cleared it and oh my God, so much poop came out. So much poop came out and it was horrible. Unfortunately, by that point, there's internal damage. She still ended up passing like very quickly actually after I released the poop. I have heard of some people being able to catch it early and save their spider. However, it's like a reoccurring issue. Like they clear it and it happens again. They clear it and it happens again. Happens even to the most perfect keeper. So, and lastly, this one is probably the most frustrating thing that you will experience, that I've experienced, that every keeper will experience if they have a larger collection like this. The more spiders you have, the more the chance increases of a spider dying with seemingly no reason. This just happened to me with Pikachu. It's happened to me with my S. hoffmanni. It happened to me with my adult female P. lagardi. Sometimes it's age, sometimes we don't know. I mean, we don't know. Like Pikachu, she was eating, she was drinking, she was pooping, and I found her and she looked, I didn't even know she was dead. She wasn't in death curl, she was just dead, but she was super duper old, so I'm guessing it's that. Happens to slings. Remember, spiders have a lot of slings. They have a lot of babies because not all of them will survive into adulthood. Just like genetically, they're just not all going to. And it sucks, and you will always feel guilty every time it happens. Or you did something wrong, maybe even, and you just will never have the answer. Like, it's frustrating. Don't know any vets that see tarantulas or do necropsies on tarantulas. It's also one of those things that happen to even some of the best keepers. At the end of the day, this is all part of the hobby. A lot of this is a learning experience that comes with literal experience. Oh my God, I can't believe I almost forgot this section. Escapes. That's like one of the main questions I always get is what happens if they get out? Have they ever gotten out? Yes, I have accidentally had a few get out before, but I've never lost one completely for long. And many of the times that they escaped, they found me before I knew they were even missing. So there was one time that Pikachu, actually her lid didn't go back on her enclosure the right way, and she was able to squeeze out, and she just webbed up right next to her enclosure. She didn't go far. And that's the good thing about tarantulas, is they usually don't go far from their enclosure. They really don't want to leave their enclosure because that is their safe place. That's where they've webbed up. And if it's an arboreal tarantula, typically they go up. And I did have a Caribbean versicolor escape one of those like rubber band enclosures with the janky lids, and she found me before I even knew she was missing by walking up the wall in the bedroom. The main way that they usually will escape is from a gap in the lid or ventilation that is too big. Typically the rule of thumb is if they can fit their carapace or their head part out of the ventilation, then they can probably squeeze their entire body out, even if their abdomen is bigger. You also want to be really careful about what kind of enclosures you use. Obviously I am an affiliate with Tarantula Cribs. Use my affiliate code CAT10, save 10% always, but no, these enclosures are genuinely the best because we do make them warp resistant, and the magnets are very strong. And now we have switched completely to rust proof magnets, which is actually very important, because if the magnets aren't strong, if the magnets rust, then yes, they can push themselves out, and tarantulas are very strong. You want to be really careful about not cutting corners when it comes to enclosures, and making sure that the ventilation holes are just the right size. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. Like this video if you did, subscribe if you're not and you want to be. Don't forget I have an Instagram that I use probably way too much. It's at Tarantula.Kat. You can go follow me there. I also have a website, tarantulakat.com. I'll see you guys soon. Let's get into the members picks.